It has been 5 years since the ill-fated Sewol-ho ferry sunk off Korea's southwestern coast, killing more than 300 lives, most of whom were high school students. While many questions still remain unanswered surrounding the sinking, the general public, citizens, and politicians alike have come together in unison to call on the need to enhance safety measures in all aspects of society. Today, we go in-depth on how safe Korea is now, 5 years after the tragic incident. For that, we're joined by Dr. Kim Sang-woo, chairman of East Asia Cultural Project. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
The Sewolho ferry sinking wasn't just a simple accident. It was a tragic consequence that resulted from a series of Korea's social problems, from insufficient and almost negligent handling of the disaster to some cozy relations between certain companies and certain institutions. What are some of the issues that the Sewolho incident had left us to resolve?
Well, it's a tragic incident that should never happen again, for sure. But unfortunately, there seems to be some contrasting views on how to resolve this issue. I personally think that there is one that you could call it the linear vision, which is to put the blame on individuals. And after the so-called hindsight bias effect, you simplify the situation and you blame individuals. Now, the problem with that is that you cannot actually address the real causes and problems of the tragic incident. You actually blame the individual for his or her negligence or incompetence, and therefore you create a situation where the fundamental problem is not resolved. Now, the other contrasting view is more multifaceted. In other words, people acknowledge that there are many diverse and complex factors involved in a situation as such being created. And once there is that safety boundary that is crossed, and therefore the accident or the tragic incidents take place. Now, when we look at the situation, we wonder whether or not we can take the easy way of saying that the blaming culture, which will inevitably make the other side offensive, very defensive, and avoid responsibility. In other words, even if new people are in place, the situation will be the same. Therefore, similar accidents will take place as well. We have to acknowledge that accidents happen in life. But how to overcome these accidents are acknowledging that these causes are social, political, economic factors involved, not just individuals.
Now, following the Sewolho incident, the Korean government has made greater efforts to prevent and counter large-scale disasters. Establishing a control tower that oversees the disasters is one example. But unfortunately, small and big disasters continue to rattle Korea. How do you assess the Korean government's current ability to deal with these disasters?
Well, when we look at the recent forest fire in Gosong, in Gangwon-do, compared to the past forest fires, it was put out quite relatively quickly. And the Blue House, which handles these crises, has this National Crisis Management Center overlooking everything. And I think that was very effective. But at the same time, I still feel that it could have been better, because on the first night of the fire, no helicopters could take off, because we did not have helicopters that could take off at night, nor during the windy period where we had a lot of wind on those days. And the fire spread very rapidly. The fire department requested, the Gangwon province requested a budget to buy these 2 helicopters, large-size helicopters, which could operate in the night and also in heavy wind. But it was rejected. And there are these trucks, vehicles that could operate in mountainous areas. It's German-made, costing around 1 billion won. Again, the fire department asked for them, but again, lack of budget. And if we had those 2 articles, equipment, the fire would have been much more easily put down, I personally think.
The requests were made before the forest fire broke out.
Before.
So budget is still a big problem in the Korean government's handling of disasters.
It is. So therefore, you have to really prioritize what is important. And I, for one, think that those 2 particular equipments would have been very, very useful.
Now, it has been 5 years, but the truth behind the Sewolho sinking still remains in the dark, with so many questions, including the exact cause of the sinking, still left unanswered. Why is this? And what are some of the other contentious issues that still need to be settled?
Well, I mean, in a way, the Sewolho ferry incident escalated into the political situation where President Park Geun-hye was impeached. It led to all that, and the subsequent incidents that arise from all this had an upheaval effect on Korea, and hopefully it will have a positive effect and to make the country even better. But having said that, we still see similar accidents taking place, and I know that it takes time. But if the people do not change their mindsets and make an effort to endure some inconveniences, these kinds of things will continue to happen, as I have said. The so-called, now the opposition party and the previous government are under investigation and trial for such incidents in the past. And one of the things is the cause of and who is responsible for the Sewolho ferry tragedy. I hope that everything comes out in a very transparent manner and everything is acceptable to the public at large. Unfortunately, the politicians have made this a political situation where there are 2 sides which are placing blames on either side. The one side, the current government and the ruling party, are blaming the previous government and the opposition party, saying that you are the cause behind the Sewol tragedy and you have created all this conspiracy and hampering and disrupting investigations. And it may be true. I hope that it will be acceptable to the people of Korea as a whole. It should not be bipartisan as such. Partisan as such.
Now, the public's anger over the government's almost negligent handling of the Sewolho ferry disaster led to calls for amendments of safety-related laws. And I believe there are dozens of Sewolho-related bills were submitted at the National Assembly. Could you give us a check on how those bills are being processed now?
There were about 67 in all, and I think about 22 were either enacted or it's been dispelled, repelled. The remainder are directly, indirectly related to safety, with the mentioning of Sewol ferry incident. Unfortunately, the politicians, being politicians, they are more now involved in other issues which are taking the political headline. So unfortunately, in terms of passing these bills within the National Assembly, feet are dragging. They are not actually, the politicians are not working towards passing these bills. That is unfortunate.
Now, the entire nation was in utter shock in April 2014 at the tragic news. How do you think the incident changed the public's perception of safety awareness?
Safety awareness, I think it has had an effect to a certain extent, but I still think that it's a long ways off because, as I said, if people are not willing to endure the inconveniences that are caused by taking these measures of, we have this pali-pali culture which always tends to do things very quickly or rapidly. But for safety and safety measures, you cannot do it quickly. You have to take steps, and proper measures and proper steps takes some amount of sacrifice and effort on a person's individual's effects. So it all depends on how people are able to accept the fact that safety, you need to pay a price. That, I think, is the most important thing that people have to remember.
Now, many argue that more preemptive measures are needed to prevent such disasters from recurring. What more can be done on both government and individual levels to prevent such tragedy from happening again?
Well, as I have indicated, the problem is that the government and the politicians are interested in issues that take the grand headlines. And in a way, to be fair, there's so much that they can do in the span of time and the budget that they have and all this. But at the same time, I think what they are doing is to pay attention to the symptom rather than the cause and the reasoning behind this. Because these things, you need to make an effort. It doesn't really it's not glamorous. It doesn't catch headlines. It's an effort that you have to make on a very everyday process, and it takes time, effort, money. These are all things that government bureaucrats or politicians would like to see spent on things that will be more, how do you say, more effective for kind of a showing off their.
Now, one last question before I let you go. We've briefly touched upon this question, but would you say that Korea is safer now, post Sewolho disaster?
I think Korea is a very safe society in general. I mean, I think foreigners who visit Korea are very much satisfied with the condition of the security at night. There are many places around the world where you cannot go outside at night. Right. Korea is a safe country. But having said that, we can do more in terms of being more advanced towards accepting these kinds of measures, which are regulations which restricts your individual, sometimes your individual freedom, your individual rights, sometimes sacrificing for the greater good of society. I think Korea is in the process of becoming an advanced country, not just economically, but also mentally, culturally. And therefore, I think we have a promising future if we continue to address these problems and issues. And if the politicians and government become a little bit more bipartisan and try to resolve these kinds of national problems together rather than blaming each other and saying that you are at fault for creating this kind. It is not true. I think any government will suffer these kinds of incidents, tragedies, problems. No one's perfect. We are not living in a perfect world, and accidents happen.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kim, for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.